The popular podcaster interviewer Lex Fridman has chatted with some of the biggest names going. He recently did an interview with Prime Minister of Israel Benjamin Netanyahu. The conversation got round to the so-called conflict. I say so-called because a conflict suggests two sides of equal strength, but this isn't anything remotely like a conflict. There's only one side blowing up its civilian infrastructure, one side enforcing apartheid, and one side literally committing ethnic cleansing. Let's call it what it is. A perpetual war crime. Israel's $24.5 billion military budget and high-tech weaponry lucratively exported after they're tested in the lab of Palestine is up against an Arab dad's army that make rockets in their mum's kitchen and kill as many Arabs as Israelis. It's about time we stopped this lie, this smokescreen, this false equivalence like it's Russia fighting America. How much of an idiot do you have to be to fall for that one? Anyway, let's deal with the interview. So Lex Fridman opens by asking who's to blame for the impasse. I'm so stupid. For half a second I thought Netanyahu might be honest for once. Wouldn't that be a sight? I know, it was dumb of me. There's probably more chance of him converting to Islam. They don't want a state next to Israel. They want a state instead of Israel. They say if we get a state, we'll use it as a springboard to destroy the smaller Israeli state. We didn't give territory for peace. We gave territory for terror. Lex lets him spew his propaganda for about 5 minutes straight, and Netanyahu obliges by representing the Palestinians as just a notch below rapacious vampires. Lex doesn't challenge him once. No nuance, no pushback, no attempt to humanize the Palestinians or give any context to their 70-plus year struggle. Man, this is Soviet-level propaganda. When Lex is talking to Kanye about anti-Semitism, Lex shows passion and engages in forthright interruptions, which is necessary, but equally interesting. All the a-holes that effed you over in the music industry are individuals. They're not Jews. They're human with opportunities, and they took those opportunities. I know people are going to say, oh, he's just being overly picky here. In fact, even when Lex was talking to the Palestinian poet Muhammad al-Kurdi, I noticed he made some timely interventions, adding context in terms of what Palestinians did to deserve Israel's Jenin raid. Many of the 50 Palestinians who have attacked Israelis since start of the year have come from the Jenin camp. Palestinian attacks inside Israel have killed 24 people this year. Those are the different perspectives. What's Israel doing there in the first place, Lex? They're occupying. Like Russia, like Russia, like Russia. Get it? So Palestinians have every right under international law to fight their colonizers. Fair enough, attack the refugee camp if you think you're man enough, but don't pretend Israel's acting in self-defense when Israel shouldn't even be there, and by stepping on Palestinian soil, Israel's the aggressor by default. So stuff your context, Lex. What happened to context when Netanyahu spewed his racist diatribe against the Arabs? That's right, you stayed quiet like a scared little boy. At this point, you're just an apologist for this sick regime. So Lex does push back when he needs to defend Israel or the Jews. Listen, I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, a Jew defending Jews, surprise, surprise. That's not the point. And don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily dismissing him out of hand. At least he brings Muslims onto his podcast, despite his unconscious biases. Compared to others, at least he's making an effort to get the Arab voice out. And that's a million times better than not having it out, credit where credit's due. But like all of us, he also has his tribal biases, and this encapsulates a big part of the reason why Israel gets away with its disgusting crimes. Because nobody cares what the likes of Amnesty International, UNHRC, or Human Rights Watch is saying. People don't care about real facts coming out of boring, hippified humanitarian reports, unless it's about the crimes of China, Russia, or some Middle Eastern kingdom. But with Israel, they get fed sound bites from Joe Rogan and Lex Fridman and go to bed thinking they know what's going down because Israel has found a way to get privileged access on strategic platforms. So we've got a crazy situation of humanitarian bodies saying the Palestinians are being cleansed from their own land, and the Israelis have been systematically doing this for decades, but Netanyahu bypasses accountability by calling in his cozy relationships with CNN, MSNBC, Lex Fridman, Jordan Peterson, etc. to spew his propaganda directly to the public. And when you've got spineless hosts like Jordan Peterson or unconsciously biased ones like Lex, I call them the sanitizers, because when they platform the likes of Netanyahu, the West assumes it's okay to imprison millions of people inside human cages. You end up with the inevitable summation of a world turning a blind eye to the 20th century's victims of one of the worst atrocities in human history, perpetrating another atrocity in the 21st century against another set of victims. You couldn't make this up. The same blind spots that existed in the Nazi era exist now. It's like we've learned nothing from history. The idea of two states assumes that you have on the other side a state that wants to live in peace, and not one that will be overtaken by Iran and its proxies in 2 seconds and become a base to destroy Israel. Oh God, this is too much. Everyone knows the reality is it's Israel that's stealing Arab land. But don't take my word for it.
He reiterated that settlements are a flagrant violation of international law. He urged the Israeli government to halt and reverse these decisions and to immediately and completely cease all settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory.
Not once did Lex raise any of the issues around, take your pick, Israel demolishing Arab homes, its policy of collective punishment, stealing entire Arab neighborhoods, shooting protesters or journalists for simply doing their job, incarcerating innocent people and letting settlers kill and harass Arabs and steal their property. By the way, all this is officially documented by Israel's own impartial human rights organizations like B'Tselem, and if one such crime was committed by any other actor, it would have resulted in that nation embracing its pariah status faster than it can say but. Yet Israel's doing all those things systematically in plain sight for 50 plus years, yet it gets a seat on respectable podcasts hosted by respectable personalities and has all its despicable crimes whitewashed for worldwide consumption. Which part of any of this makes Lex look fair or good? To put Lex's bizarre vow of silence in perspective, just imagine Lex interviewed on his podcast Vladimir Putin, and he didn't ask Putin once about Russia's atrocities in the Ukraine. Come on. That's unfathomable, right? And for this, you'd rightly assume Lex was in Putin's pocket. It just shows you how unbelievably successful Israel has been in normalizing its crimes, convincing the world the opposite of what's actually true. Put it this way, we all laugh at Russia for claiming to be acting in self-defense, and yet Israel gets away with precisely just that, because it's a Western ally. At one point, Benjamin Netanyahu says, "I don't think we have to accept the premise that we have to wait for the Palestinians. I decided to go directly to the Arab capitals. If we go to the 98%, we have a much greater chance of persuading the 2%. Netanyahu lets us in on his government's shockingly immoral strategy. Israel is unilaterally talking with other Arab states to engineer a situation where Palestinians are forced into acquiescing to their own ethnic cleansing. The so-called Abraham Peace Accords, frankly, this is the equivalent of a husband locking up his wife in a room, mercilessly torturing her, denying her food and freedom. Then to convince her she has no choice but to stay in the abusive relationship, he offers her family a massive bribe to disown their daughter. Once again, Lex doesn't think it's worth calling him out on this. At another point, Netanyahu says, "They didn't say, oh good, now we have our own territory, our own state, Israel is no longer there. Let's build peace, let's build economic projects, let's enfranchise our people." No, they turned it into a terror bastion from which they fired 10,000 rockets into Israel. When he says this with a straight face, you begin to understand the kind of psychopaths behind this occupation. It's hubris, the mentality you see in serial killers who get sloppy when they get away with killing with impunity. Think about it. In what world, based in reality, can anyone expect any nation, let alone Gaza, to be a haven of peace when 1.6 million people are crammed into a tiny territory and it's been under siege for 16 years? Israel controls air, water, land, the electricity around it. The UN has described it as, quote, an open-air prison, while their relatives and fellow countrymen are also stuffed inside 19 giant human cages called refugee camps in the West Bank, which Israel suffocates and strangles by controlling access to and around it. And while that's going on, Israel is hastily building illegal settlements across the future Palestinian state. In Jerusalem, Muslims are being cleansed out of their neighborhoods to engineer a demographically Jewish capital. What Netanyahu is saying is so sadistic, no moral person would contemplate thinking this, let alone have the audacity to blurt it out to the world. It's the sick equivalent of someone grabbing the crutch of a person with broken legs and berating them for not walking. But again, Lex isn't going to pull him up on this obvious evil by this evil person. Remember the Kanye West interview when Lex called out his anti-Semitism? His reaction went viral. But let me ask you, is anti-Semitism worse than apartheid and ethnic cleansing? Both bad, but which one's further up the scale of evil? I know it's distasteful to rank suffering, horrible, but when you've got someone like Lex who's only calling out anti-Semitism and tacitly endorsing ethnic cleansing by acting as a mouthpiece for Israel's unfettered propaganda, you're forcing people to call out your hypocrisy. At another point, Netanyahu says going forward, as a final solution, Israel will control all security, while the Palestinians will only control their internal affairs. Israel's going to control that airspace and the electromagnetic space. Security has to be in the hands of Israel. The Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves and none of the powers to threaten Israel. The responsibility for overall security remains with Israel. Let me ask Lex, does he know of any other sovereign, self-governing nation on earth that this applies to? There is not a single nation that exists that its foreign affairs and security is controlled by another nation. Astounding. How did Lex not pull him up on this? My jaw was literally on the floor. We always hear Israel is unfairly held to a higher standard than anybody else. But dude, if this isn't Israel itself purposely wanting to be held to a different standard, then I don't know what is. Israel is essentially asking to be able to enslave another nation, and it wants the world to look the other way. And Lex certainly did that here. He didn't bat an eyelid. You still want me to think Lex is a good guy. You don't even have to be fair at this point, just human. Imagine I said to a person, you can do anything you want in a house, but I control everything once you step outside. This doesn't require thinking, Lex. You just have to have literally one good bone in your body to know that this is the devil's morality. This video isn't about attacking Lex Fridman because he's a Jew, because I know plenty of influential Jews on social media who support the cause of Palestine and call out Zionism and its disgusting atrocities. Majority Report's Sam Seder, Kyle Kalinske, Daniel Pachman, the Rational National Gentleman, they all call out Israel's crimes and they're Jews. This video is about Lex Fridman hosting the leader of a nation that's committed war crimes and violating human rights without challenging him, thereby letting the propaganda go unchecked, ultimately whitewashing Israel's apartheid and war crimes. This is about Lex making a dog's dinner of this interview with Netanyahu.